Welcome to the Independent School Podcast. This is the place for senior school leaders to discover innovative ideas and actionable tips that are going to help to strengthen their school's income streams and secure its future. My name's Juliette Corbett, and I'm a consultant, speaker and facilitator specialising in independent schools. So thanks for joining me today, and let's get started on this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode all about crafting your bursary strategy. Now, anyone who's listened to this podcast over the months will know that this combines two of my real passions at work. Firstly, strategy and the importance of focusing your scarce resources on the things that are going to really make a difference. And secondly, bursary provision within independent schools and the way that that can positively impact on social mobility, becoming even more important during this pandemic we're going through. So I'm really excited to be combining these two topics today, and what I'm aiming to do is to stay at a really strategic level. I want this to be useful for governors as well as for heads, bursars, directors of development, and I want to stay at a really strategic level and think about what are the questions that you need to be asking yourselves and what options do you have, what strategic options do you have going forwards as you're crafting your bursary strategy. So I'm going to be using my 4 building blocks of strategy framework in order to structure this episode, and I suggest that you use this as well when you're developing your bursary strategy. But before we dive into that, I just want to quickly define what I mean by bursaries. Now, here in the UK, I think we're coming to a fairly consensus view on how to define that. But I'm really aware that internationally there are lots of different terms that are used in different countries with regards to the same idea of means-tested fee remission. So when I talk about a bursary, what I'm talking about is a fee remission, so a reduction in school fees, either of a certain percentage or of 100%, reducing school fees on the main criteria of means testing. So the main criteria for selection for which pupils are going to receive this bursary is to do with a means testing benchmark that people have to meet before they qualify for this particular type of award. And that means testing can be based around parental income, assets. It can include various different things. But basically it's assessing whether or not the parents would have the ability to send their child to the school without this support. So bursaries, the key criteria is means testing. This is in contrast to what I call scholarships, and what are commonly known as scholarships here in the UK, where the main criteria is something to do with talent. So it could be academic, could be sporting, music, it could be anything you like, but there's some measurement of a pupil's talent, and that is the key criteria that's used in the award of a scholarship. Now that sounds relatively straightforward. The reality is a lot more messy. Often awards have a combination of the two. So there is an element of means testing and an element of assessing talent. And quite frequently now, scholarships may involve some element of a reduction in fees, a fee remission, but there's also an element of status awarded to those holding a scholarship. So it's not quite as straightforward as it sounds. But certainly within the UK, we are seeing here an increasing focus on bursaries and away from financially awarded scholarships in the terms of scholarships that are awarded with a fee remission attached. So a shift towards means-tested bursaries. We're also seeing a shift towards bursaries in fundraising campaigns and away from capital campaigns. And that's been accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic as well. And a little bit more on that particular topic, if you're interested in finding out more, then you can go back to my episode 9 of this podcast, and the link to that in the episode notes for this week's episode. And you can see there why bursaries are becoming more popular as a fundraising case for support, as opposed to capital campaigns, especially given the pandemic we're going through. So I'd like to focus on the 4 building blocks of strategy as a framework. I use this in all of the strategy sessions that I facilitate for all organisations that I work with, including independent schools. I know that it works. I use it for fundraising strategy, whole school strategy, bursary strategy. It's a very generic framework, which is a way of structuring your thinking around strategy and getting clarity. And it's based on a best practice strategic development approach that I use all the time. So I know that it works. So the first stage, the first building block is your vision. So this is all about defining your big picture, long-term vision for bursaries in your school. And there are two areas that I'd like to talk about, which I think you really need to discuss openly within your governing body, your senior leadership team, as you're embarking on either a new bursary strategy or enhancing a programme that you've already got. So the two areas I think you need to talk about is firstly, identifying your bursary why, and secondly, clarifying your strategic choices. Okay, so let's kick off with that bursary why. There are a number of reasons that schools may want to create a bursary programme, and being able to have clarity internally at least on what that reason is, and then being able to communicate that with clarity externally is really critically important to the success of a bursary programme. And I've taken this terminology of finding your why from Simon Sinek's work and his book Starting with Why. And again, I'll link to that in the episode notes. And it's all about finding your why, that is your driving force behind a particular activity. So in this case, I think there are a couple of different reasons that schools might want to pursue a bursary strategy. The first one is all to do with social mobility and the benefits that bursaries can have on enhancing social mobility, especially given the climate that we're living in now with the pandemic going through. This is really critically important. It's a way of connecting the independent school sector to society as a whole and justifying why it should continue to exist, justifying why it can have a positive impact on society. And most schools actually have a charitable or founding purpose that they can connect this to. And it's more than just justifying your charitable status with the Charities Commission. It's about connecting it through to your founding purpose. So whether that's 50 years ago, hundreds of years ago, many schools can tell the story of how their founders really wanted to widen up access to education to a large group of people. So your bursary programme can help to link your current activities back to your founding purpose. So most schools have an element of the social mobility and the benefits of social mobility and the link to their charitable or founding purpose as one of their whys as to why they want a bursary programme. Important to explore that. The second reason that schools often want a bursary programme is that it can positively impact on the culture of the school. It helps the school to become more naturally outward looking, more inclusive, preparing pupils for the real world that they'll be working in and living in, to show that their school is connected to their local community in a more meaningful way. And it means that often parents are looking for an independent school environment which isn't a cloistered, separated, elitist community. Parents are looking for an opportunity for excellent education, but where their children are really going to be prepared for thriving in the real world. And so bursaries actually help to enhance that element of culture within the school. And then thirdly, often schools find that a bursary programme can actually strengthen their business model. Now, this shouldn't really be the driving force behind why you want bursaries, but certainly I feel that if you can align having a positive social impact with making your business model more sustainable, then surely that's a good thing to be striving for. So one of the most obvious ways to think about this is if your school is not at capacity and has empty seats in classrooms, then finding pupils who can come to your school and have a really positive impact on the culture and be partly funded, either partly or fully funded by, for example, fundraising or by overseas franchise income, we'll come to the income streams a little bit in a moment, then that means you are generating some income for those empty seats. It's a way of harnessing income generation opportunities, especially within fundraising, which may not have been open to you otherwise. And so thinking through how your school can align this social good kind of reason for doing bursaries with ensuring that it's helping to make your business model more sustainable is something that I always recommend to schools that I'm working with. So that's all about thinking about your bursary why. Why do you and your school want to create or enhance your bursary programme? The second area of your vision that I'd like to talk about today is to do with some key strategic choices. Now, these are three things which your governors, your senior leadership team need to have real clarity around each of these strategic choices in order to ensure that your bursary programme is as strong as it can possibly be. So the first of these choices is around the balance between to what extent the bursaries you're going to be offering will be what we term transformational, which means 100% bursaries. So you're looking for children where the parents are unable to contribute anything towards school fees, so the bursary covers 100%. And in some cases, actually even more than that, because it may also cover allowances for school uniforms, school trips, etc. These transformational bursaries are becoming more and more popular, and increasingly, if your bursary why for your school is to do with your charitable purpose, your founding purpose, and wanting to improve social mobility, then transformational bursaries are probably the area you're going to be focusing on. The other strategic choice you can make, though, is to be focusing on smaller bursaries. So bursaries where you're awarding perhaps 30 to 60% of school fees, where the parents then have to pick up the rest of the bill. Now, this won't have the same impact on social mobility, but it may have an impact on your business model in a more positive way, in the sense that it's opening up the school to a larger number of local children. So there's no right and wrong answer to this. We are definitely seeing a trend towards transformational bursaries rather than the smaller bursaries. But often schools, I think, can benefit from considering combining the two. So there isn't an either or choice here. It is about combining the two as it may be appropriate for your particular school. So there's no right or wrong answer to this strategic choice, but having real clarity within your governing body and your senior leadership team about what you're doing and why is very important indeed. The second strategic choice I'd like to talk about is the balance between either going for endowment funding or a kind of a spend as you go, spend now, pay as you go type approach. So in an endowment approach, you are looking to raise funds, often from fundraising, but could be from other sources, where you put the money that you're raising, the finances you're raising, into a protected capital account, often invested in stocks and shares and so on. And then you spend the interest which is generated by that capital each year. Now, if we could wave a magic wand, then every school would want to go for endowment. It means that the work you're doing now to raise funds can benefit the school on an ongoing basis forever, which is really appealing. The big downside, though, is you need really substantial amounts of money in those capital funds before they're generating an annual income from interest, which is going to have a really significant impact in terms of the number of bursaries you're able to offer. And that's why many schools start with the alternative approach, which is a spend now or kind of pay as you go bursary programme. And here it's about raising money from a variety of different sources, but the money is spent within a year or two actually supporting students who are at your school now. Now, that means you have to continually raise those funds in order to just stand still in terms of the number of bursaries you can offer. But it does mean that with a relatively small amount of money coming in, you can start to have a much more positive impact in terms of the number of bursaries that you can offer, which in turn means that you can tell more stories about the positive impact you're having. Those may be anonymous, obviously that's entirely appropriate given the school's policy, but telling those stories about impact is what generates increased giving over time. So that's the real benefit of a spend now approach. And just like the debate between transformational or smaller, your strategic choice between endowment or spend now funding, there is no right and wrong answer. And often it's a combination of the two, which is your ideal sweet spot. A lot of schools decide that, for example, if they get a legacy, that may go into an endowment fund, but that most of their other fundraising that they're receiving is going into a spend now type approach. So finding the combination that works for you is the right way to go. But always what's important is having clarity within the governing body and the senior leadership team about what you're doing and why. And then there's a third strategic choice that you need to make at this point as well, and that's to do with how you're going to communicate to what extent the school's finances are also going to be helping to fund bursaries going forwards. I've heard one director of development call this skin in the game. It's a bit of a abrupt term perhaps, but every school will have skin in the game. Every school is going to have to, if they want a robust bursary strategy, bursary programme, they're going to have to either invest in fundraising or invest leadership time in exploring overseas franchise opportunities, or they're going to have to be reallocating some money from current parent fees, the fees that current parents are paying, into bursaries. Whatever it is, it's highly likely that your school will have to commit some resources to this programme. So the question then becomes, how do you communicate this? Again, no right and wrong answer. One way to do it is to be really transparent and say, we are committing X each year, £500,000 a year, whatever it might be, to our bursary programme, and we are looking for donors to come along with this journey with us and to match that funding. That can be a really nice way of communicating to potential donors that the school really prioritises and believes in this project. Alternatively, that may stimulate complaints from current parents that if the school has this amount of resources available, if this is coming from fees which are being paid by current parents, that may not go down too well. So you need to test out the messages within your community, find out what's going to work for you, whether you keep that little bit more kind of quiet investment behind the scenes, or whether you go out all guns blazing, really shouting about it. Again, no right or wrong answer, but having internal clarity is critically important when it comes to bursary strategy. So that's the first building block of strategy. That's your vision. The next building block as you're developing your bursary strategy needs to be analysing your accelerators and your sticking points. So your accelerators are your internal strengths and your external opportunities, which are already driving you towards delivering your bursary vision. On the other hand, your sticking points are your internal weaknesses and your external threats, which are already causing challenges which are going to prevent you from delivering that vision. Now, I always say in strategy development sessions, we always spend time thinking about accelerators, because as humans, we do want to recognise what's going really well and what's a strength and a kind of positive thing going forward. That is really important. But I always say to people, it's the sticking points that really, really matter when it comes to strategy. If you're not overcoming your sticking points, you are going to continually hit your head against the same brick wall over and over again. So finding a solution for the main sticking points when you're thinking about expanding your bursary programme is what's really important here. So I don't have hours and hours with you today, so I'm going to focus on two key sticking points that I hear time and time again, and a few quick strategic level ideas about how to solve those sticking points. And the first is, how will we fund bursaries? How on earth are we going to find the finances required, given the economic turmoil that we're in order to build this bursary programme? There's no easy answer to this sticking point, but it will always involve building a diversified income stream. There is no one solution to this problem. Fundraising is a really key part of the solution. And in quite a few of the episodes back in series 1 of this podcast, I explored various elements of fundraising, and there's a lot more to come in this series. So do pick up on those episodes if you want to know more about fundraising within independent schools. There's also the opportunity to generate income by hiring out your sports facilities or your school facilities as venues for events. Back in episode 4, I talked to Andrew Cook from Repton all about this. So do explore that episode if it's something you're interested in thinking about. And there, I think it's making sure you are ready to really go as and when this pandemic passes, and it will pass in time, so that as the economy picks up, as the social distancing reduces, your school is poised and ready to take advantage of the opportunities that will undoubtedly be there with regards to facilities hire. The third area is international school franchising, and a lot of schools are going into those with the plan that the income generated will go towards bursary plans. And there are all sorts of other income streams that can be explored as well. Some schools are thinking about creating or are creating a commercial arm to their online education offering to generate an additional income from their online education offering. So whatever it is you choose, you need to choose diversified income streams. And that is the key to making sure you have sustainable funding for your bursaries going forwards. The second sticking point that I hear really, really frequently is, how are we going to find the right applicants? How do we find the pupils who are going to really benefit from these bursaries? You have two approaches here. Again, I'm going to stick at the strategic level at this point, but you have two general approaches. One is to do with going it alone, and you have to have a really clear marketing approach to what are the key messages, what partners do you need to build a pipeline of people who will want to apply for these bursaries. Not just, I have a deadline in a month, therefore I need to do some advertising, but really strategically, how do you get local parents to be aware of your bursaries so that where they are waiting for their child to be the right age so that they can apply? You create a kind of pipeline of excitement around your bursary programme. And a key part of this is speaking to an audience that is not familiar with independent schools. You want to take down those barriers that you may not know even exist, really pulling down those barriers so that they can access these bursaries. Your second strategic option is to partner with an organisation that does this as a speciality. And Royal Springboard is one example of that. You sort of outsource the finding of the applicants in order to ensure that you're getting the support that you need to move forward more quickly on this. So whatever the right approach is, the key thing here is you have to identify your sticking points and then focus your time and energy on figuring out how you're going to overcome them. So that's the second block of strategy. So your third building block of strategy is all around identifying the general approach. So this is identifying the general way that you're going to overcome those key sticking points. You keep it to a couple of sentences, really short, really focused, and you talk about the general way you're going to overcome the sticking point. So to give an example, if you identified a sticking point in the previous stage, which is that you don't have enough fundraising income at the moment, and that you identify that's partly due to an underinvestment in your development office, then your general approach, given the current climate and economic climate that most schools are operating in, it's really tough to just say, I'm going to click my fingers and increase investment in fundraising. So instead, what you decide to do is to slowly, gradually increase investment in fundraising. But you're also going to switch your attention to major gifts fundraising, because that's where you can have a much better return on investment. So that could be your general approach. Keep it really short, keep it really focused. How are you going to overcome those sticking points? And then your fourth and final building block of strategy is about your action plan. This is where the strategy moves into tactics and operational issues. And this is where the governors step away. The governors will be involved in identifying the vision, the accelerators and sticking points in the general approach, but they then leave the leadership team to work on the action plan. So, for example, you might have an action plan which is to create a really detailed fundraising plan in the previous example, where fundraising is your main sticking point. So those are the 4 building blocks of strategy applied to the bursary strategy. So hopefully that gives you a framework and a series of strategic choices you need to make to analyse where you need to be in terms of creating your robust bursary strategy. I use this framework all the time in my work with independent schools. I facilitate strategy away days, both in person and online, strategy sessions for fundraisers, and also group programs. And I'm always using this framework. I find that it is clear and simple enough to give a structure, but versatile enough to really dig into the details of what your particular challenge is. If you want to know a bit more about this particular framework, then I talked about it more in episode 13 of the podcast. The link to that is in the episode notes for this week. And you can also download my Rethinking Strategy in Independent Schools report. And the link to that's in the episode notes as well. So to get to the episode notes, go to www.consultjuliet.co.uk/019. So that's it for this week. Do get in touch if you'd like to give me any feedback or give me any thoughts on other topics you'd like me to cover in the podcast, or if you'd like to work with me and think about how I can help you develop your bursary strategy in your school. Fantastic. I'll talk to you again next week. Bye then. So that's it for today, and thanks for listening to the Independent School Podcast. If you want to make sure that you don't miss out on future episodes, you can sign up for my newsletter at www.consultjuliet.co.uk/sign up. There you can also explore the various ways that I help independent schools to strengthen their income streams and secure their future. Fantastic. See you next time then.